Good morning, dear sisters. Happy October 2nd session of our devotion. I love this time of year. It's just so gorgeous to be outside. So I hope you have your cup of coffee or your Coke and you're ready to sit down for a few minutes, and let's dive into the Word of God for just a few moments together. One of the things when we were talking about Princess Warrior, I wanted to choose some women from the Bible that we could discuss and just look at their story, look at their life, see what they used and how really they were a warrior. So I chose 3 women from the Old Testament. That's what we're going to look at this week. And the first one I want to talk about is Jael. When I was thinking about warrior, I thought she's a perfect woman. She didn't have armor on, but she certainly used some weapons against the enemy. So if you want to just turn, after we finish this, make a quick note of where you can look, because we talked about last week that the Word of God is our sword. We have to know the Word of God. It's where we get life. And we have so many examples that we can learn from the Word of God if we just apply them to our life. So Jael comes from the book of Judges, chapter 4. And her name actually means mountain goat or an ibis, or an ibex. And a little side note to that, when I was looking, it said, "He who gets somewhere because he is good at something useful." And that struck me, because if you're good at something useful, you're going to go places. Now, when I was kind of looking at Jael, she was married to a man. Heber was his name, and he was a friend to the enemy. So the Israelites were already oppressed by an opposing country, but her husband was a friend to this enemy. So I'm sure that somewhere they suffered a little less persecution. Maybe their crops and if they had camels or donkeys or whatever, sheep, maybe their animals weren't marauded quite like the others were. So she may have felt a little bit of social outcast. Maybe not. I don't know. But the Bible does tell us that her husband was a friend to the enemy. So when the Israelites went to battle against this enemy, and Sisera, who was the commander of the army, they began to do battle. He was exhausted from battle. He came and he sought security from their tent. Maybe because he knew that they were an ally. Maybe he thought that they could protect him in some way. So he came there. Jael came in. He asked for water. She gave him warm milk. He laid down because he was exhausted and went to sleep. And she saw her opportunity to strike the enemy. Now, the Bible does tell us, or it teaches us in backstory, that women were they were very resourceful. They were very much workers, and they were the ones that usually put up the tents. So she was accustomed to using a tent peg, a hammer. She had developed strength and hammering those tent pegs in when they transferred their tent from place to place. So she took her opportunity. He was laying down sleeping. She got a tent peg. She got her hammer. She hammered it straight through the temple of his head and killed him. And so when everybody comes around looking for him, where is he? She says, "I got him right here. Come and see." And God delivered the enemy through the hand of a woman. She used what was in her hand. She used her resources. She used her knowledge and her ability to defeat the enemy. All in Judges chapter 4. I encourage you to read it, take some notes about her, and look up some backstory if you can find something about her, and see what that is that can speak to you. How do you use what you have been equipped with, what you have found useful, and what you can use to combat the enemy and actually defeat him? Another woman that is a heroine in the Old Testament is Abigail. And her story comes from 1 Samuel chapter 25. Now, it talks about Abigail being a beautiful woman, an intelligent woman, even faithfulness, because it talks about her husband being surly and mean. He was not a nice guy, and he was not nice, I'm sure, to his slaves. He probably wasn't nice to her, because back in that day, women were not highly favored and valued. They were property. They were the husband's property to be used however. And so she stayed with him. She was faithful and even used that faithfulness to help manage his wealth, because it says he was a wealthy man. Lots of sheep, lots of goat. And so she helped further his productivity by being faithful to him. I'm sure all the slaves understood who she was and how valuable she was to him. So that story comes with David. David and his men of 600 had protected them as the shepherds had been out. You can read all about this, but they just came during sheep shearing time, which is a very festive time, a time to sacrifice some of those animals and eat them and enjoy some of the fruit of all their labor. And so he just asked, hey, can you feed my guys? And Nabal, being what his name means, a foolish man, he just bowed up and said, who are you? Why should I do that? And he really angered David. And when David's servants came back and told him all about it, David bowed up. He was ready to go take revenge. But another servant went and told Abigail what had happened, how Nabal had acted toward David, the whole truth of the story. And she immediately started preparations to go and take care of David and to be a mediator and a counselor and a negotiator with David, who was not the enemy, but he was an ally. But he was ready to take revenge and destroy every male in that camp. So she took what she had. Intelligence, wealth, fruit cakes, some meat, and she went to offer an appeasement to David and say, I'm so sorry this was done to you, but let me see what I can do to help out the situation. She used what was in her hand. She was a quick thinker, and she used her eloquence of speech to really convince David not to destroy her camp, but really to let God take the vengeance. And if you read the rest of the story, you'll find out what happened to Nabal. But ultimately, Abigail became a wife of David, and she was truly a queen warrior. So read that story in 1 Samuel. And the last person that I want to talk about today is Esther. Esther, she had a very hard luck story. She was orphaned as a child, and her older cousin took her and raised her. They lived not in their own country, but they lived as aliens in the land because they were in Susa, in the Babylon area. They weren't where they were supposed to be, but years before, they had been taken captive, so they were living there. Now, one thing that you might really not know with this story of Esther, and I encourage you to read the book of Esther, it's a great story, full of drama, full of intrigue, full of just evil and vengefulness, and also the hand of God and the providence of God is how he takes care of his people. But Esther, it says she was young, beautiful virgin. And the story of the king, he got disgusted with his first wife, or one of his first wives. And when he was feeling a little penitent, he couldn't take Vashti back, so he wanted a new queen, someone more beautiful, someone more able. And so it says he sent his servants or his people to take all of the young virgins that are beautiful in the land. Well, I'm sure she didn't raise her hand and say, here, I'll go. But I kind of imagine her saying, you don't have a choice in this matter. We're going to take you. Put her in a harem. Her life was forever changed. And each was going to be on trial before the king. So they were brought before the king after their year of beauty treatments for him to spend the night with them. And then after that, they were moved to another harem of concubines. May never see him again. They would never have a life, never probably have children, never have a husband, never have their own home. This was what she was facing. But the thing with Esther is she was obedient. She learned what she could in a place that wasn't necessarily a place of comfort or a place of familiarity for her. But she looked around the situation and she took the opportune moments. She became poised. She became, if we want to say it, dignified. She went through the beauty treatments. She was listening to the culture around her and how that she could take what they had to offer and apply it to her life so that she could be an influencer later on. The story goes that the king chose her. She became his queen. But her people were at risk through a very evil plot of Haman. Again, read the story. But because she was obedient to her uncle, because she listened to the voice of God and trusted God, she stepped out. I'm not going to say that any of these women were fearless, because they all faced a place where they could be destroyed themselves. Esther had to come before the king. She hadn't been summoned by him in over a month, and she was asked to go before him and plead their case for the Israel nation. She knew what was at risk. She knew that if he did not accept her into his presence, that it meant sure death. But she was willing to overcome the fear and walk in courage. Jael walked in courage. It took courage to raise that tent pet, thinking he could wake up at any moment. It took Abigail courage to go before David and plead the case for her camp. All these ladies used what they had, different aspects, and I believe that they were great heroines. They speak to us. Even when I was thinking, it's like, why did I choose people who didn't have the most godly husbands? You know, and I thought that that even speaks to many of us. A lot of us think that our husbands may not necessarily be the spiritual head of our home, but we can still be used by God. We still love our husbands, we respect them, and we come under their authority, but we know that God uses us as an individual. He loves and cherishes women, and He uses them for His glory. So I want to encourage you today, what is in your hand? You look around, see what is within your reach. How can you reach your community? How can you step out? How can you make an impact for the name of God and to bring glory to Him in the society, in the place, in the world where you're at? I guarantee you that if you look hard enough, you will find something. You're not going to be discounted because of maybe the circumstances that you are living in, because God is going to use you. If you open up your heart and say, God, if you'll use me, I'm going to be faithful. I'm going to be faithful to you. And it may be reaching your family. It may be reaching your neighborhood. It may be reaching even beyond that. But I guarantee you, God has a plan and a purpose for you that only you can fulfill. So read these stories, the book of Esther, Judges 4, and 1 Samuel 25, and you'll read these stories of these women, our heroines of the Old Testament, and apply what you can to your life, because you are a princess warrior and you have a job to do. I love you, and I'll see you next week.